If there's one question that I get asked the most, it's how to deal with writer's block. And the short answer is I've never really had to deal with writer's block, so I'm definitely not an expert. But I think within that answer, maybe we can reverse engineer and kind of deconstruct why I don't get writer's block and maybe why some others might. Again, I'm no expert on this topic, but I thought of 4 broad categories as to why someone might get writer's block. And they are planning, motivation, focus, and momentum. So I get, the older you get, you tend to have less free time and more obligations, family and work and other things like that. And it's often more difficult to carve out portions of your day to write, especially when you're at work all day and maybe you have a desk job and you come home and your brain is fried and you just want to relax, watch a TV show, hang out with the kids or the dog or your partner. The last thing you really want to do is sit in front of a computer and write. I totally get it. I don't think that's writer's block though. That is something else. I think writer's block is when you're, sitting at a computer, you maybe want to write and nothing's really coming out. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about writer's block and what you can do to overcome this writing resistance. So the first one is planning, and I've talked about planning and outlining in other videos, and I've also talked about ideas being currency, which is kind of relevant to this. But I think if you really break down the writing process, it's actually 2 things. And when you maybe get writer's block, it's people attempting to do 2 things at once. And the 2 things are this. There's a planning stage and then there's a writing stage. And so if you haven't done the planning and you go into your computer and you try to write a novel or a short story or whatever, and you're trying to plan and write at the same time, it doesn't really work and you can get jammed up. I think those are kind of 2 different parts of your brain. The planning is a very kind of logical, analytical, critical thinking. You're thinking of structure and order and that kind of thing. Writing, when you have to be creative and, be eloquent with your word choice and the flow of the character dialogue, that is more of an art form. So it's like mixing art and this logical planning. And sometimes those aren't easy to kind of do at the same time. So what I would recommend is do extensive planning. And the more extensive and the more work you put into your planning process, the easier the writing process actually is. And for some, planning is not a fun thing to do, but you can just really break it down into either a 3-act or a 5-act structure. Again, I've talked about this at length in this other video, which I'll link to at the end of this. My writing process and how I plan a novel. But I think when you write a novel and it's planned out and you sit down for the day and you already know where you're going, you don't have to think about where you're going because it's already, that mental work has already been done at a previous stage. So when I write, I sit down and I go, okay, I have to write about this scene, and this scene, and this conversation. And it's actually, quite fun to do, most of the time. Some of the times it's, a boring scene, which I've talked about on some other videos. But for the most part, I'm not thinking of how the scene will unfold. I've already done that. And when I just write, I'm just using my brain and my creativity to make the most engaging scene possible. So the second reason why somebody might get writer's block is motivation. And this might be uncomfortable for some people to hear because I think if you truly want something in this life, and you want it bad enough, you will do it or you'll find a way to do it. If you don't do that thing, maybe you don't want it bad enough, right? Like, do you really want to put in the work and, become a best-selling novelist? Because maybe you don't. Maybe you like the idea of it, but the actual work involved, writing and editing and, maintaining social media accounts and doing YouTube videos and, it's a lot of work, and maybe you just don't care enough. Maybe that's not your path, and that's okay. I think sometimes people fall in love with the idea of being something, not necessarily being a writer, but you're like, you identify with it. You say, I'm this thing, but are you really that thing, or do you just like the idea of being that thing? Do you know what I mean? I think sometimes, and I've met these people, I'm not just making this up, I've met people that claim they're one thing, like, oh, I'm a writer, but they haven't written anything, or they claim to be an actor, but they haven't acted in anything, or do you know what I mean? So I truly think it's a motivation issue. So if you really want something, I'm talking really passionate about something, then you will do it and there will be no writer's block. if you have writer's block and you're not doing it, maybe you just don't want it bad enough. So if you struggle with motivation, and I can get, you know, maybe motivation as a character trait that's not necessarily pertaining to the thing that you want to do, but just in general, I've met people like this. They're just unmotivated people. And this could be a result of their kind of childhood or whatever. So if you really want to kind of overcome this lack of motivation, there's 3 things that I would suggest you do. The first is set a writing goal. I have a goal to write 1,000 words a day. Doesn't necessarily need to be good, doesn't necessarily need to be about that story, but just get in the habit of writing. The second thing is to kind of get into a routine and create a habit. So I have this giant board on my wall, it's a dry erase board, and I have all my kind of weekly activities planned out. So, you know, if you have a day job, 9 to 5, you probably have no problem going to that job. Or if you have a class from 2 to 3 in the afternoon, you'll go. Why? Because it's on your schedule. You're going every week. You're paying for it. I think humans are very good at adapting to routine. So if you set a routine, like I'm going to wake up at 6 a.m. and write before work from 6 to 8, or I'm going to write every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, or I'm going to write on the weekends from 9 to 11, or whatever. You create some schedule that works for you, and just show up. And maybe the first thing that you write when you sit down is just a writing exercise. There's probably a million online what you could do. You maybe describe something in your apartment or your room, or maybe journal, write about your weekend or whatever, just to kind of get in the habit of writing. And then once you feel that those kind of creative juices are flowing, I would maybe go into the story and start typing out your story. Okay, so the third thing that you can do to kind of overcome a lack of motivation is reading bad fiction. For whatever reason, it's a really good motivator. When I read bad fiction, I immediately, slam the book shut and I go, you know what, this is terrible, I can do better. And then I go to my computer and I write. I don't know, it works for me, and maybe it'll work for you as well. So the third cause of writer's block that I've identified is a lack of focus. And this is quite a broad category, but just generally speaking, your maybe thoughts are meandering, you're chasing whimsies, you're into archery, you're into badminton, you're into writing, you're into swimming, you like watching TV shows and YouTube, and you can't really focus on one thing. And I think writing requires a lot of focus. It requires to sit down at a computer and type out a story or a chapter or whatever. There are a million things to distract you. The internet is right there. There's your phone. You can go on, you can text people. You can maybe go to the fridge and get something, or maybe you want to go outside and get some suntan or something. Like, there's a million ways that you could be distracted, and so I think that could be a problem if you're not focused, and it's very difficult to writing is not a fun thing, let's be honest. For most people, you sit down at a computer and you type. There are funner things to do, and I think a lack of focus could be a culprit. There's a few things you can do to overcome this kind of distraction or lack of focus. The first one is to try software. I think there's one called Write Room and Dark Room, and it's a writing program that turns your entire screen black and all you see is the text. And the idea there is that there's nothing to really distract you. There's no internet. You're not seeing icons. You're not seeing pop-ups. You're just kind of focused on just text on a screen. So that's one way. The second way, which I've heard people do, I don't do this, but is to have a writing computer, one that's not connected to the internet. Maybe it's in a separate room, and all you can do is open up a Word document and type on it. So, that's another way. The third thing is to try writing very early in the morning or very late at night when people are in bed. For whatever reason, this is what works for me. Sometimes I will wake up really early in the morning and, before work, and I'll just write, and everybody, the house is quiet, everyone's asleep, and I feel less tempted to be distracted. I'm not going to the fridge, I'm not going outside, I'm just at my computer, and I know that this time is time to write. So the fourth thing that I do, and I've heard this from other people, I think even Sherlock Holmes talks about it, where you clean your house or you clean your room or whatever you're doing, you have your affairs in order. And I think in Sherlock Holmes, he talks about, you know, having your mental attic as clean as possible so you can kind of access and find the things that you want. And I know for me, if I have a messy house or my things aren't in order, if I have bills to pay, or you know what I mean? Like I have things on my mind to distract me, then I will think about those things. But if I, you know, do my laundry, my bed is made, I've vacuumed, my desk is clean, I've eaten, I've taken care of everything, then there's really fewer things that my mind is occupying my mind and I'm thinking about. So that one really works for me, and yeah, try it out. Maybe it'll work for you as well. So the last thing I'll say about a lack of focus is sometimes we have too many or too few ideas. And that can cause writer's block. If you have too many ideas, it's often hard to know which whimsies to chase. It's like taking a drink through a fire hose. There's just too much information coming at you, and you kind of get kind of paralyzed, and you don't know which direction to take. And I think a result of this could be planning properly, to take the time beforehand to sift through all those ideas, to know which ones to ignore and know which ones to focus on, and kind of have a plan of attack. If it's having too few ideas, I think you experience this with a lot of artists, you know, like stand-up comedians. Go out and do different things and try different things. I think I've talked about this in another video where you're trying to create more information to have better ideas. I think in another video I talked about being the house cat, where you're bound to the house and you just really have very limited experiences, versus being a bird who, you know, can fly anywhere and have all these rich experiences. And, you know, one animal probably has a way better experience when they're dreaming at night than the other. So similarly with people, I think if you want to have richer ideas, you know, try to, you know, read books, watch documentaries, go travel, hang out with interesting people, listen to podcasts, click on articles, you know, check out, you know, science websites, or I don't know, whatever you're writing about. Just kind of dive deep on that subject, and there's a lot of things that can inspire you. For instance, the other day, I'm on the bus and I see this guy with the shirt that says Africa. And from the time that I saw that until the time that I arrived to my destination, it was maybe 20 minutes, I had created an entire plot for a really epic book set in Africa, all because that one shirt idea kind of sparked my imagination. But what if I wasn't on the bus, and what if I didn't see that shirt, and what if I wasn't kind of in the headspace to be observant and think about it? So I think having too few ideas is easy to solve if you become, you know, curious about the world and kind of study different things and have a lot of kind of resources to draw upon. Okay, so the last thing that I think kind of plagues people of writer's block is momentum. And I feel like momentum is very important in a lot of different areas of your life. Relationships, for instance. If you try dating somebody in the beginning and you see them, you have a really good first date, you maybe have a really good second date, really good third date, and then you guys take like 2 weeks off, and then you try to pick it up again, the momentum is lost, and you'll find that you're not really into that person as you once were. I think it's very important to keep that momentum going. You know, in the dating example, you're going on a date, you're texting, you're having a phone call, you're setting up other dates. You kind of feed the momentum so this relationship can kind of take off and start running. A lot of things in life are like that, like learning a new skill or getting into a new habit or routine. And writing is like that too. If you write, let's say, I'm gonna do 1,000 words a day, and you write 1,000 words a day, and then you go on vacation for 2 weeks, you come back, you've lost the momentum. You don't know where you're at, your head's, you know, not in the right space, you're not thinking about the story. So I think keeping like a routine and keeping the momentum going is huge for writer's block. So if you struggle with, you know, having this lack of momentum, I've identified 5 things that you can do that could maybe help you overcome this. So the first one is have a writing buddy, someone who kind of motivates you. And this is kind of similar to the workout buddy, someone who's like, hey, we got to go to the gym, let's go. So maybe one day you're feeling like going to the gym and your buddy isn't, you can inspire them to go, and maybe the next day they're really inspired to go, but you're not. So you can kind of help motivate each other. So as writers, you can often do this as well. You can have a writing buddy to kind of bounce ideas off and talk about your story and say, okay, well, I'll race you to 20,000 words or whatever. Or even just meeting with them to kind of listen to their experience. Like, oh, I just wrote this awesome chapter, and that'll kind of motivate you. I'm like, okay, well, what scene are you working on? You can kind of bounce ideas off each other. So, you know, that's been a really huge help for me. The second thing is to improve your skill. And I think with writing for me, I know I've been doing it a very, very long time, since I was a little kid. And generally when I write, it comes out the way I want it the first time. I don't have to spend a lot of time mulling over word choice or rewriting. You know, I do a little bit of that, but generally I just write, and I don't, you know, when I go back, there's very few edits. It kind of comes out, but that takes a lot of practice to get to that stage. But that's really helpful for momentum. If you can just develop your skill in a way where as it comes out, it sounds the way you want it, and it makes the kind of writing process go smoother, and you don't get kind of stuck on all these, you know, mulling over choices and like, I don't really like the way this sounds, backspace, backspace, delete, delete, and rewrite it. No, I don't like this, delete. That is a motivation killer or a momentum killer. And I think, you know, developing your skill can actually overcome that. So you can like take creative writing classes, or, you know, do writing exercises, or, you know, get feedback on your writing to kind of see where you can improve. And, you know, ultimately just practice, and, you know, you'll eventually get better at it if you just kind of put in the work. Okay, so the third thing is, you know, just because you're not writing doesn't mean you can't be thinking about writing or thinking about the story. So, you know, I constantly am thinking about the story when I'm on my commute, or I'm in the shower, or kind of the moments before bed, and that is work. I am working on my story, even though it doesn't look like it. And there's a famous quote that I really like that says, the wife of a writer, or maybe the partner of a writer, what they don't understand is when their partner is looking out the window, they're writing. So it's something like that. I like the quote because it's like, there's many times where I'm like looking out the window and it looks like I'm doing nothing, but I'm working, I'm thinking about stuff, right? Okay, so the fourth thing that I think could maybe help overcome this like momentum issue is maybe reevaluating the plot. It could be that you don't have writer's block, or you don't have a lack of motivation or focus or you know, momentum. It's that your plot sucks and you are not interested in it anymore, and maybe you're don't like the direction it's going, and it's maybe too hard to fix, and you just want to scrap the whole idea and start with a totally brand new idea, or maybe start over. And that's possible, right? Just maybe reevaluate the plot and see, is this something that you're even passionate about? Maybe you started this a year ago or 6 months ago or whatever, and you're like, yo, I don't even really want to write this story anymore. I don't care. It's not interesting. Why don't you start writing something that is interesting to you? Okay, so my final piece of advice, and the final thing I'll say about writer's block is, you know, you've heard the saying, you have to crawl before you can walk. Sometimes it could be the case, and I'm just, you know, theorizing here, that the reason why you have a lack of motivation or momentum is because you're trying to take on a much larger task than either your skills or your attention span can handle. You know, writing a novel is actually a very difficult thing. It's a lot of work, and, you know, that could maybe be overwhelming if you're standing at the bottom of a mountain looking up. Taking that first step, or maybe you're 10 steps in, you look up, you're like, oh, I've got a long way to go. That can be very, you know, can demotivate you and like kind of kill your momentum. So maybe I could recommend writing a blog, or writing a short story, or a flash fiction or microfiction. Try writing something that's smaller, which is not necessarily easier. You know, writing a really compelling short story in 10,000 words isn't necessarily easier than writing a novel. Has its own challenges, but it is fewer words. So in that respect, it should take less time, and, you know, that could help as well. Okay, so there it is. Those are some of my thoughts on writer's block and overcoming writer's resistance. Let me know in the comments if any of these techniques helped you, or if you can think of anything that you do that helps you that maybe I didn't think of. Leave a comment in the comment section below. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. And if you want to hear more videos like this where I talk about writing, please hit the subscribe button, and I will see you next time.